Today, we're talking about Monsters, Inc. This was it's a common favorite, and Monsters, Inc. is a sudden world of monsters, kind of a parallel universe of, that they kind of have some of our cultural, they have a cultural awareness of what we do, and yet they're monsters. So, the main character is this big blue furry guy, Sully, he's the eye there, and of course Mike is standing on the X, and then you can kind of see some of them. And they there's a problem, there's a crisis in this parallel universe, in this Monsterville, I don't remember what, Monstropolis, I don't remember what it's called. There's a crisis, they're running out of power, they've got a power crisis. The energy, they're having rolling blackouts, they're having conservation drills, it's a very real threat to their way of life. They don't have enough energy. Something that we can kind of relate to is, we think about our world often, we've talked about conservation and these kinds of things. But what's interesting about this universe is that the way they get their power, the monsters get the power, they harness the power that is in the energy of a child's scream. Now, it's a strange thing, I know, but it's also at the power plant. Mike and Sully and some others work at the power plant, Monsters Incorporated. And it's their job to go through these doors. And the doors are portals in the horror world. And they can go through this door, and they scare children at night. They come out, the monsters in the closet come out and scare children. And when the child screams, somehow they harness that energy, and it powers the city. And this is Monsters, Inc. And they've got a commercial, and this is what we're going to show here.
The future is bright at Monsters Incorporated. We power your car, we warm your home, we light your city.
I'm Monsters Incorporated.
Carefully matching every child to their ideal monster to produce superior scream, refined into clean, dependable energy. Every time you turn something on, Monsters Incorporated is there.
I'm Monsters Incorporated.
We know the challenge. The window of innocence is shrinking. Human kids are harder to scare.
Of course, MI is prepared for the future with the top scarers, the best refineries, and research into new energy techniques.
We're working for a better tomorrow. Today.
We're Monsters Incorporated.
Monsters Incorporated. We scare because we care.
So that's their commercial. And as the movie goes along, the little girl somehow attaches herself to Sully, the big blue furry one. She comes into the other side. She comes into the monsters' world. And this is another crisis now, because the monsters, as far as monsters are concerned, they understand that children are toxic. They're poisonous. It's imperative that you never touch a child, that you stay away from them, that you keep them on the other side of the door, and a child on their side of the door is a catastrophe. And as the movie goes on, this little child known as Boo, little Boo, isn't scared of Sully, and this is the whole crisis. She's not scared of Sully, partly because when she encounters him, he's not doing the scaring. He's just it's this weird thing where he's sort of looking around trying to figure out why there's a spare door. So Boo isn't scared of Sully. In fact, Boo calls Sully, does anyone know? Kitty. That big blue furry guy with the horn, she calls him Kitty, and she falls in love. And the two of them eventually build this friendship. As the plot thickens, there's a lot of, she runs to a restaurant, causing a great panic. There's, all sorts of, hijinks. Basically, Sully and Mike accidentally stumble upon this plot to fix the energy crisis. There's this energy crisis hanging over the city. And the plot to fix it is to scare kids more, to produce a machine that they kidnap the kids now, bring them into the monsters world, hook them up to a machine that would scare them so much, it would be more than just one scream a night. It would be this ever-flowing power source of screaming and fear. And Mike and Sully realize how horrible this is because they've fallen in love with this little girl. Eventually, they discover, again accidentally, that when she laughs, there's a power surge. And they realize by the end of the movie that her laughter is 10 times stronger than her scream. And at the end of the movie, the roles are reversed. And Mike, the big blue hairy one, is the scarer at the beginning of the movie, the great scarer, who's pretty famous because he's so good at what he does. And his partner, Mike, the little green one, he barely saw, and that's kind of a joke of that commercial, but he barely shows up in the thing. He's the assistant, but at the end they switch because Mike's the funny one, and he goes into the room and he does a little bit of stand-up. He's voiced by Billy Crystal, and he does a little bit of stand-up and makes the kid laugh. And the laughter fills up the power way more strongly than any scream ever could. Laughter is stronger than fear. It's a powerful message. And it's powerful in part because part of what's so funny about the movie, and the big comic, the comic setup of this entire movie is the absurdity, right? It's this world upside down. It's this absurdness that the ones that we should fear are the children, and the monsters are the ones that are just doing their job. It's this great absurdity that these great, giant, furry, hairy, toothy, horny monsters are fearful of this little girl. And that absurd reality is what's funny. And there's lots of jokes around this about the big monsters being scared of a little girl. And there's this powerful message, of course, of it's the child who breaks the system that works on fear, that works on screams, that powers the city, that gives this big Monsters Incorporated, this big corporation, and powers everything, is built on screams. What breaks that cycle is a child laughing. A child who, for some reason, isn't scared. A child who doesn't see a big scary monster, but instead sees Kitty. And this heart of this child melts first Kitty, and then transforms the whole way of doing. She breaks the whole system. It falls apart. Their whole understanding of how to power their city, how the system works, falls apart when they realize that it's the laughter that's really the source of power. And it's the child, the little child who leads them, right? The child who's able to laugh. The child who only sees a friend. Who sees some curiosity. Who sees adventure. That's a beautiful story. But if we take a harder look at it, we realize that there's something more to this story that we realize. If we take a harder look at ourselves, a little bit more prophetic look at who we are, the systems that we make, and the ways that our structures work, and we realize that the monsters who work on the system of fear and the absurdity of fearing a child becomes a harder look when we think about what children we may fear. You know, it's one thing to smile at little Boo. But how many people respond to fear at the entrance of a Syrian refugee? How many respond with fear when we see a hungry child at our doorstep or coming into our church on Saturday? How many times do we respond with fear? How many children are we really fearful of, if we're honest? If we took a good hard look at how our system works and how we operate, how many children, how many innocent people are we really afraid of when we get right down to it? And the absurdity of the monster screaming the child gets a little less funny when we realize that sometimes there's some we may fear too. The thing is, fear is a powerful motivator. Fear is powerful. It powers that whole city, but it powers a lot more here on this side of the door too. Fear has powered churches. Fear powers, in a lot of ways, our economy. Fear powers our political process. I mean, how many churches build themselves up? How many preachers build themselves up by telling you what to fear? By telling the people there's something very big called God, and you better fear God or you're in trouble. So you better come here and we'll alleviate the fear. We'll give you something to be, we'll protect you. We'll keep you in the warm arms of these walls. Give more money, give more service, and we'll protect you from that fearful God. How many of our politicians that are based on prop themselves up on the fear that if you elect that other guy, just wait what's going to happen? How much of our political process is based on fear of what happens if that monster wins? How much of our economy is built on the fear of I've got to have mine? It's built on an economy of scarcity where there's clearly not enough in this world, and if I don't get mine, I've got to make sure I've got enough. How much of our military industrial complex is built on fear? How many millions, billions, trillions have we spent motivated by fear? Now, it's not to say that there's nothing to fear in this world. There are monsters out there. There are monsters all around us. There are monsters that we need to fear, that are very real. But when fear becomes the motivation, when fear becomes the reason for doing, the reason for being, somehow we become something less than what we're called to be. The writer of 1 John wrote this letter to a community, and it's disputed whether it's a letter or it's sort of an essay. It's a strange letter. It's a beautiful letter in our Bible. And it's written to a community of people that were probably starting to be persecuted a little bit. That were facing some struggles, that were facing some fear, that had some real things to fear in the world. They were being ostracized from their old Jewish communities as they were starting to now become Christians, and that word Christian became a dangerous thing to be. And they were ostracized from their communities and their institutions. And so there was something real to fear. And within the community, then, whenever a community is fearful, what happens? You start to blame. You start to divide. You start to set up camps. You start to figure out who's us and who's them, who's red and who's blue, who's black and who's white. And we start, whenever we're pressed by a fear, we start to figure out who to blame. And we wonder who we can trust. And the writer of the gospel of this letter of John, 1 John, reminds us that when we respond out of fear, we're missing the point. Jesus didn't come for fear. Jesus didn't come to scare us into belief. This writer, the writer of 1 John, reminded us over and over again throughout the letter that God is love and God is light. God is love and God is light, and perfect love casts out fear. John doesn't say that there's nothing to fear anymore. But it reminds us that our motivation can never be that of fear, that of blame, but instead the motivation for the way we treat one another especially has to be that of love. The love of Jesus Christ. The love of the Son who would come to break down all those barriers, to cross those boundaries of fear, This is our source. This is our motivator. And if we believe that God is love and God is light, then it changes the way we interact. It changes the way we encounter one another. And suddenly the monsters don't look like monsters, but they look like someone we might befriend. It looks like someone we might learn from. It looks like someone we might get to know a little bit. And now, does this work on grand political stages? I don't know. But if you work in our communities, and it can work in our hearts. Remember, this whole system of fear broke down when one child didn't see a monster, but saw a friend. When one child didn't see a reason to scream, but instead saw a reason to laugh. One child. This week, another child kind of became famous. She became an internet sensation. A little girl named Tiana. And this video of her talking to her mom and dad, specifically to her mom and dad who were divorced. And I didn't get it recorded and downloaded onto our video in time. But this little girl, Tiana, had parents that were fighting. And so she pulled her mom aside and she sat down on the step. It looks like she's sitting on the steps and she's talking to her mom. She's pleading with her mom. Can you and Dad be friends? Everything's up high, she says. Cutest little thing, this little Tiana. Everything, you guys are all up high. I just want everything to be down low. So I'm not trying to be mean, I'm not trying to be a bully, but I just want everyone to be friends. And at one point, after about a minute and a half of this, she says, my heart is something. Everyone else's heart is something too. And in that moment of watching this video, I absolutely melted. My heart is something. Everyone else's heart is something too. And she goes on to say, if we live in a world where everyone's mean, then everyone would be a monster. But we need everyone to be a person, including me, including Mom, everyone. I want everything to be as good as possible. One child who saw nothing but anger, who saw something just to fear, recognized that all we do is respond in fear, all we'll have left is monsters. One little girl with the strength and the courage to tell her mom, my heart is something. Everyone's heart is something too. Millions of people have watched this video. Now, I don't know what her mom and dad have done. I don't know how they could possibly watch this little girl and not be melted and snap into reality and realize there's another way. Maybe they're not, the divorce probably happened for a reason. Maybe they'll never be together again, but maybe they can be friends. And who knows how many people watching that video were melted by one little girl, one reminder, one child who, instead of being fearful, had the courage to laugh. I don't know what can happen in this world. I don't know all the answers. I know that there's lots of things to fear, and the fears are real. But I also know that God is light, and God is love. And perfect love casts 10 times stronger than a screen. And that my heart is something, and your heart is something too. And maybe that's a good place to start. Maybe that's enough.